Good morning, everybody. I really have had the privilege to be here. I've been totally inspired by the last couple days and the passion and the ideas that are being shared here. So thank you for having me. I'm going to cover a lot of ground in a short period of time and conclude with sort of a thesis of where I think we can go. But to start things off, the circle of life 500 years ago kind of worked like this. You lived and died within 5 miles of where you were born. Effectively, your parents' past was your future. If your dad was a king, you were a king. If your parents were peasants, you were peasants. And this wave of innovation hit the shores and really connected the world in a much more integrated way. First, the Gutenberg press in 1439, the steam engine, James Watt from Scotland in 1756, the locomotive engine in 1804, the telephone in 1876, the automobile in 1886, then the airplane, Orville and Wilbur Wright in 1903. And this really kind of brought the world into what was referred to as the American century, epitomized by the American dream, where people came from around the world to the United States to seek opportunity from a lot of times modest origins. The American century was categorized by this rising standard of living, GDP per capita up 4x during the first 75 years of the American century, education attainment up 13x. In fact, the United States had #1 high school attainment, third in the world in college attainment. Innovation entrepreneurship rose dramatically, a 15-fold increase in patents in the first 75 years of the American century. Immigration increased 7 times in the first 75 years. And opportunity rose dramatically. There was a 50% drop in inequality by 1975. So the American century was characterized by the soaring opportunity and this dramatically plummeting inequality. So Old MacDonald had a point, E-I-E-I-O. Education, innovation, entrepreneurship, immigration, opportunity were really the key ingredients to seeing this dramatically improving and open opportunity world. Then the 1980s hit with the information age and the PC revolution. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, Dell, and Intel became household names. Globalization in the 1990s with the fall of the wall in Berlin, which saw this dramatic increase in quality of opportunity, with middle class going from 1 billion people in 1990 to 3.2 billion people today. Looking at venture capital, providing funding innovation. In 1990, 99% of all venture capital was United States. Last year, 55% of venture capital was outside of the United States. Shanghai and Beijing had as much venture capital last year as Silicon Valley had. Internet in 2000s, with the world truly was becoming flat. Then the mobile phone revolution, 2010. So you had this incredible emergence of waves of these mega trends: information age, globalization, internet, mobile, all changing the world very dramatically in a short period of time. Despite that, since 1980, in the last 40 years, the income of the lower 50% of Americans was flat, while at the same time, the top 10% of Americans' income increased 2x, the top 1% increased 3x, and the top 0.001% increased 7x in the last 40 years. It's effectively become a winner-take-all economy. CEOs now make 360 times the average worker, up from 23 times 40 years ago. 10% of the world's population controls 90% of the wealth. In fact, the 8 wealthiest people in the world have as much wealth as the bottom 50% of the world's population. The digital economy is remarkable, but digital stands for disproportionate gain to the leader, and that's what we see with internet economics. Just a quick example of this: Facebook, the leader in social media, has a $500 billion market value. The #2, MySpace, was bought by News Corp for $500 million, and Friendster, #3, was hijacked by a bunch of Filipino housewives for no money. So basically, you can see how that all works, but there is this disproportionate gain to the leader, and that's working in basically every aspect of society. So Aristotle said, inequality is the parent of revolution, and I think you're seeing a really troubling and frightening environment where you truly are seeing incredible gaps where the rich are truly getting richer and fewer people are participating in the future. This isn't new. Marie Antoinette said, let them eat cake. That probably wasn't the greatest philosophy for her with the French Revolution. But recently, effectively, Ken Griffin, and he's not alone, has said, let them eat cake. He bought his $238 million pied-à-terre as one of his 5 homes, the hedge fund manager. It's effectively almost this kind of cluelessness to what's going on in the world around him. But here's what's going on in the world around him. Things like Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter. You've seen Pope Francis said recently, he's radically resolved by rejecting the absolute autonomy of markets and the financial speculation by attacking the structural cause of inequality. And that's the world that we're in. You know, we got to remember, in a democracy, 50.1% wins. And so you're seeing this huge rise of populism around the world, not just in the United States, where you have, obviously, Donald Trump was a poster child for populism, but Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, two of the leading candidates on the other side. But this isn't unique to the United States. This is happening in every corner of Earth at this point. Not only is the rise of populism, you've seen this rise of socialism. This was a recent cover of The Economist with AOC, who's a rising star in U.S. politics as a leading spokesperson. In America, you have 61% of all young people are positive about socialism. So the millennials actually think that socialism is the answer. And it's not that these young people are ignorant. In fact, they're very smart. What they're doing is paying attention. They're seeing a system that's been rigged and isn't working for them and the people around them. And so they say, gosh, something else has to be better. Just last week, Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, said, capitalism as we know it is dead. And I think he's right. But Margaret Thatcher said, the trouble with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. And that's another kind of reality that we have to grapple with as we kind of look at the dynamics of the future and how we have equal opportunity to participate in the future. Other facts. Remarkably, last year, for the second year in a row, the U.S. life expectancy fell further, and there's a number of reasons for that. But it's not all people are equal. With the different wealthy people's life expectancy kept on rising, where poor people's basically continued to fall. There's a 15-year difference in the United States between a male that's wealthy versus a male that's poor. In fact, a poor male in the United States has the same life expectancy as a male in the Sudan. So overall, you've had this incredible environment, these incredible fundamentals where the world has gotten healthier, wealthier, and wiser, but the future's not equally distributed. So looking back again, the United States in 2000, you had 4 states in the United States where 50% of the households were categorized as poor, which is remarkable when you think about that. You actually have 4 states where 50% or more of the households in a country as prosperous as the United States would actually be in poverty. We look today, it's risen to 20 states. So what are the consequences of that? And you look at what does that mean? Well, if you come from a poor family, if you're a child from a poor family, you're 5 times more likely to drop out of high school. You're 8 times more likely to go to prison. In fact, 80% of the prison population comes from high school dropouts. SAT scores, which are effectively the ticket to the most prestigious universities, there's a direct correlation between your household income and your SAT scores. So in other words, what the SAT scores do the best job predicting is how wealthy your family is. Looking at the most prestigious schools, 75% of the students come from the top quartile family household incomes. In fact, if you come from a bottom quartile family income, you have just an 8% chance of graduating from any college. We all know there's a direct correlation between how much school you have and your income. You add this all up, and if you're born poor in America, you have a 70% chance of staying poor. So effectively, this concept of the American dream that was so aspirational is an illusion. It's fictional. It's dead. Looking at effectively what's happened is the admissions director to Harvard has become the hiring director at Google. You're looking at the Fortune 500, 10% of all the CEOs come from Ivy League schools. 30% of the US senators come from Ivy League schools. By the way, there's 5,000 universities in the United States alone. 100% of the Supreme Court justices are from Ivy League schools, and the last 5 presidents have come from Ivy League schools. So this have and have not society is getting more and more extreme, and it's not sustainable. So we've come full circle. Your future is determined by how well you select your parents. And that fundamentally is wrong, and that's not sustainable. When we talk about sustainability, that's not sustainable. So while in some ways things haven't changed, we all know that we're in a world that's going through dramatic changes. And over time, it's remarkable how much things can actually change. So this is a map of Europe 200 years ago. To go from the UK to the United States would take roughly a couple months on a boat. Half your travel party would be lost. Today, when you go from Edinburgh to New York, it takes 7 hours, and if your Wi-Fi doesn't work, you're pissed off. This is a picture of the Tour de France 100 years ago. Take a close look at this. So 100 years ago, it was thought that smoking cigarettes actually enhanced your athletic performance. So things have changed slightly in the last 100 years. This is Gordon Moore, who 50 years ago, just over 50 years ago, postulated that computing power was going to double every couple of years. And so what became known as Moore's Law, what's amazing was not only that it actually happened, was that it wasn't a scientific law or a natural law. It was basically Gordon Moore imposing his will on an industry, not only transforming the technology world, but really society as we know it. So if you just look at the last 20 years, the cost of computing is basically being free. Cost of storage is zero, and with basically infinite capacity. If the automobile industry had that same type of progress, a Ford Taurus that cost $20,000 in 1990 would be less than $1 today, and you'd throw it away after you used it. The biggest market caps, the largest market cap companies 50 years ago were IBM, AT&T, General Motors, Standard Oil, and Kodak. So talk about change. 2 of those 5 companies in the last 50 years since Moore's Law actually went bankrupt. And if you look at the 5 largest market cap companies in the world today, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, and Facebook, none of them existed 50 years ago. Look at number 7, number 8, Alibaba and Tencent. Not only is it interesting they're from China, but they're not even 20 years old. So this space, this change is happening faster and more radically than we can even comprehend. So this is just about the time to reach 50 million people after a technology is commercialized. So with airplanes, it took 68 years from the first flight to have 50 million people use that technology to fly an airplane. Telephones took 50 years, electricity 46 years, computers 14 years, cell phones 12 years, internet 7 years, Facebook 3 years, Twitter 2 years, and Pokemon Go, it took 19 days to reach that level of people. So human capabilities are on a linear path, but technology is on an exponential path. But most troubling, what we're seeing in this environment is that human happiness is plummeting. It's falling dramatically. So it's been, there's a Psychology Today had an article a couple months ago, said the average 4-year-old laughs 300 times a day. By the time they get to 40 years old, it's 4 times a day. US suicide rates are up 30% since 1999. Increase in youth suicide is up 70%. US deaths from opioids is up 45% in the last couple of years. And teenage depression is up 50%. 1 in 3 children have an anxiety disorder by 18 years old. And one of the causes for that, while mobile technology is remarkable in terms of just being a game changer, It also has been shown to have significant impact in terms of just mental health. So in 2008, average teenager spent 20 minutes on a mobile device. Today, it's 3 hours. Average 10-year-old spends 8 hours a day with media. American children spend only 10% of their time outside. There was a Boston, Massachusetts third grade class was asked to design the perfect playground. So they designed this playground, and at the front of it had a sign that said no cell phone use. So even third graders kind of understand there's something that's wrong with the dynamics that currently exist. Yale, where some of the best and brightest students from around the world go, their #1 class is about happiness. Harvard, the #1 class is happiness as well. So it's something, they're seeking something different than just knowledge and ways to get ahead. They know that something actually fundamentally is wrong with the society that they're in. Looking at US fertility rates, it's dropped in half in the past 60 years, and that's just kind of the view of the future and optimism. So Beyonce said, "A life of money making is undertaken under compulsion, and wealth is evidently not the good we are seeking, for it is merely useful and for the sake of something else." No, that actually wasn't Beyonce, that was Aristotle too. But we already used him, and so I thought we'd better mix it up a little bit. This Varsity Blues scandal that you may be familiar with that happened in the United States, where these very wealthy families effectively made up fictitious resumes for their children to get them into better schools and gave them things that they played in sports they didn't and so forth. I mean, totally disgusting what took place. Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, said, "So your kid is already born on third base and you feel like you have to steal home for them." And that's effectively what happened, right? I mean, you think about these privileged people, and they're rigging, they basically think they can play by different rules than everybody else. And that's killing society. I'm going to talk about 2 gravitational forces, and then I'm going to conclude it with this health of nations concept. So, and I think this puts it all in framework, just to understand the environment that we're in. So the class of 2020, that's the graduating class this spring from universities. This class was different than any class before it in terms of the way they think, the way they operate, who they are. So they were obviously born 21 years ago. Also 21 years ago, Google was born in the garage. This is Sergey Brin and Larry Page. And effectively, this class of 2020 effectively has grown up in a world where information is free and ubiquitous at their fingertips. My generation, water was free and information was expensive, but things have changed a little bit. Also, 21 years ago, Steve Jobs came back for a second tour of duty at Apple with the original mission of putting a computer on everybody's desktop, ultimately putting a computer in your pocket. So for this class of 2020, it's not a smartphone, it's a phone, and they do everything with it. From getting their transportation, to their food, to their products, to their entertainment. And not only do they get everything from this mobile device, they get it when they want it, where they want it. So the concept of binge watching your favorite programs, you don't have to wait a week to see your favorite program. You can continually watch it and you see the whole series in a night if you choose. So it's no mystery that this class of 2020 thinks that going to economics class 101 at Thursday at 8 o'clock in the morning is ridiculous. Why can't you take that class when you want it, where you want it? So they think that 50% of them think that online education is good or better than a physical classroom. They have no memory of the dot-com bubble burst. They love technology, but they do remember how their friends' family lost their house in the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. And as a direct result of that, the home ownership from the millennials is down significantly. In fact, they don't like to own anything. There was more cars sold last year to people aged 75 and older than 18 to 24-year-olds. They also remember how their family lost their job at the company they worked for their entire career and the pension that went along with it. And again, as a direct result, the Department of Labor estimates that the millennials graduating from college today will have 15 careers between the time they graduate from college and the time they retire. And one of those jobs could be part of the gig economy. A second gravitational force is digital disruption and automation. So this is Mark Andreessen, who launched Netscape in 1994, bringing the internet effectively to commercialization. Over the last 25 years, you've had 3.8 billion people now come on the internet. The digital tracks have been laid. Also in 1994, Jeff Bezos launched Amazon, effectively transforming retail and e-commerce as we know it. Today, Amazon has an $850 billion market cap, and the market value of many retailers has gone down significantly, about a 50% drop, $80 billion market value lost, 90,000 jobs were lost in retail stores in 2017 alone. The good news is that e-commerce is creating jobs. 355,000 new jobs are created in the US alone since 2007. But the bad news is automation is rapidly taking away many of the kind of traditional blue-collar working jobs, manufacturing jobs, warehouse jobs. Amazon alone employs 45,000 robots in their warehouses. Chinese firms bought 90,000 industrial robots last year, expected to buy 175,000 next year. So add it all up, McKinsey says there's 350 million global manufacturing warehouse working jobs that are going to go away here in the next 6 to 7 years. But it's not just blue-collar workers, it's also white-collar workers. And what are those jobs? You have 40 million middle-skilled jobs being eliminated by 2025. Things like Robo Advisors, $7 trillion managed by Robo Financial Advisors in 2025. Already, robots are doing financial analysis on 3,000 companies every quarter with the Associated Press. So you imagine what this world looks like in the future. Money's going to be managed by robots, making decisions from input from other robots. So smart people like Mark Zuckerberg say, what does that mean? Basically, everybody should be a programmer because he'll hire any person with those kind of skills today. And in fact, there's 1.2 million computer science job openings by 2020 in the United States alone. Harvard Business Review has said data science is the sexiest job in the 21st century. It's sexy because you have this incredible demand imbalance for people with that skill and what employers are looking for. The problem with that logic is, I said, technology is on an exponential curve, human capabilities are on a linear curve, and basically we're here. And what that means is pretty soon the technology will replace the technologist. Or in other words, it's not just white-collar workers and blue-collar workers, there's also no-collar workers. So the killer jobs today will be killed tomorrow. 50% of all jobs are at risk of being eliminated in the next 20 years. So we know as sure as the sun comes up in the east, the automation will continue to eat jobs, but it doesn't eat work. So we've got to reimagine what does that look like for a future of that reality. So kind of reimagining, and I'm going to wrap this up quickly, I promise you, Omar. Here's a picture of St. Peter's Square in 2005. Take a close look at this, okay? This is what it looks like today. So in a world where you had this explosion of digital photography, Kodak, that was founded in 1888 and synonymous with photography, in fact, had the patent for digital photography, went bankrupt in 2011. So they couldn't reimagine what this future really looked like. What we got to do is think of things like everything from bringing the ivory tower down into the world. So it's not higher education, it's higher education. We got to think of the education system that we have that's structured today where you play from 0 to 5, learn from 5 to 25, have a job from 25 to 65, and then retire at 65. It goes to the new system where you learn from the time you're born to the time you retire, if you ever retire. So it's like this kind of concept of lifelong learning. And it's like if I asked you if you were physically fit and you say, yeah, I ran a marathon in 1980. Well, of course, that's ridiculous. It's the same as if you're going to be knowledgeable in the knowledge economy and participate in the future. Some of those skills, the curriculum that I think is critical, I call the 7 C's: critical thinking, creativity, communication, cultural fluency, civic engagement, collaboration, and character. And last is kind of reimagining a world that we're in, looking at the congestion. The big cities of the world are getting more congested, more polluted. And so what are some of the answers to that? Things like scooter transportation. Lime Bike, for example, is the fastest growing technology company in the history of the world. So you're seeing these different things happening and being reimagined. And so just to conclude this is this concept of the health of nations. So I happen to be feel so privileged to be in the place where Adam Smith came up with the Wealth of Nations in 1776, effectively launching modern economics and this concept of capitalism in the invisible hand. But as we talked about, that the capitalism has run amok, and there's definite issues that we need to address with it. Also in 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence of the United States, where he talked about this pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And George Washington, in his inaugural address in 1789, talked about this different type of invisible hand than Adam Smith's invisible hand. He talked about this, that people were seeking a higher meaning and purpose. That's what motivated them. That's what drove them. And so the invisible hand of capitalism, pure capitalism, is broken. And we think the way to fix that is effectively that combination of purpose and meaning with the pursuit of economic gain. So we think that's what will create this alignment of happiness and an alignment of value and purpose. So we think meaning through learning, purpose through work, and this new invisible hand, the health of nations, is starting to appear. You saw the recent cover of Fortune magazine talked about profits and purpose. Can big business have it both ways? You had the old corporate priority, which basically was the corporation was beholden solely to the shareholders. The new corporate priority has this different stakeholders involved, from the community to customers, shareholders, employees, and climate. We think that is this combination of this new invisible hand. And so the greatest, we think, investment returns in the future are going to be created where you have this alignment. The return on investment is going to equal the return on impact in this fulfillment of these different objectives that I just talked about in terms of who the different stakeholders are. And so some people might say that that's kind of fanciful, that's sort of aspirational and not real practical. I think it's just a change of mindset. And I think that's why the purpose of why this event is so important. It's thinking differently, and it's thinking about what needs to happen, how it can happen. So when Roger Bannister, in 1954, broke the 4-minute mile, previously people said that the humans couldn't break a 4-minute mile. They couldn't run a 4-minute mile because it was humanly impossible. And the scientific journal said, in fact, that a human running a 4-minute mile, breaking a 4-minute mile, their heart would burst. And so when Roger Bannister crossed the finish line and fell over, people thought he died because that was supposed to happen. What was so amazing about that was 6 weeks after he broke the 4-minute mile, somebody else broke the 4-minute mile. In the next 18 months, 6 different people broke the 4-minute mile. Today, teenagers break the 4-minute mile. People in their 40s break the 4-minute mile. It wasn't the distance that changed, it was the mindset. And so as we think about how we can accomplish these incredibly important goals, it's really changing the mindset. As the great philosopher, late great Muhammad Ali said, impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. And I think as we're here today, what's so exciting to me, Victor Hugo said, nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Well, this time has come. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be here. And